and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming back. I have a special guest today, and it's another resource that I don't think caregivers consider as they're going through their day-to-day, but this is something that I want you to consider because for those of you that have been parents and you've heard about the benefits of exposing your children or your little babies to classical music, consider this. It's the same concept for us as adults, and especially aging adults and other issues that come across for our care recipients and our loved ones. So I want to introduce you very soon. Her name is Karla Wilson. She's the founder of Music Therapy at Home, and she's an absolute advocate for caregivers. Her career, so cool to me, her career actually began as a musician at the age of 6 with an organ that became the piano and into becoming a vocalist. The beginning eventually led her to Baldwin Wallace University Conservatory of Music. Karla has a degree in music therapy and has been a board-certified music therapist for 30 years. So, without further ado, welcome on, Karla.
Thank you, Jessica. It's my great pleasure to be here with you and your listeners today.
Absolutely. And before we jump into the music therapy, I know that you're not a stranger to caregivers and the challenges that caregivers face. How did that, affect you in your life as a caregiver?
Well, sure. So the first opportunity I really had was when I became a foster parent for a 19-year-old with cerebral palsy and just numerous medical complexities. She was pretty well dependent on myself and my husband for her total care. She was nonverbal, although we learned that she could communicate with her eye gaze, looking up for yes and side to side for no, which opened up a whole new world of communication and understanding what was going on inside of her. And that was with us for about 7 years. So that was quite an experience where I really learned much of what families go through. Not everything, because it is different, of course, when the child is your biological child. But Beth was my heart, and was my heart long after she was no longer living with us. Eventually, she wanted to live with her peers in a group home setting. So that was something that we, had to move through and sort of grieve a little bit that loss of having her with us in our home, but watching her blossom because she was a very social young person, and it really, I think, benefited her to be around her peers too. So that was really my first experience with, G-tubes and having to change someone and provide their medications and puree their food and, all of those sorts of things. And it was about that same time that I was able, fortunately, to move from full-time into part-time work. So that did help, but I know that not everyone has that luxury for certain, and so that is challenging. And I did encounter that challenge of working full-time. As a matter of fact, I was working full-time in hospice at the time that my mom became ill, and I cared for her for probably about, 9 months at the end of her life. And she went from having a broken hip that seemed to be, simple to repair, and just as often will happen with folks who fall, especially when they're in their 80s and 90s. Mom was 92 at the time. And she just sort of took a dive from that point on and, kept declining in her condition. So I have to tell you, it was very much an emotional challenge for me, especially not only because Mom and I were very, very close, but also because I was working all day in the hospice field and dealing with death and dying with all of my patients. But I was working with too, and learning to have to take that hat off when I would leave work and put on the caregiver hat rather than the hospice professional hat. Keeping that on was very challenging. The hospice nurse would often sort of chide me a little bit on that, that I, was maybe trying to be too much in that role of professional as opposed to just, family caregiver. But I learned it was as for every caregiver, I believe it's a process of learning ongoing.
Absolutely.
And sometimes lessons we don't necessarily want to be learning at that time. But that was a painful loss for me, and really ended up leading to me taking some time away from working in hospice and also just as a music therapist, just taking some time. And that was having to care for myself because I really had reached a point of burnout, truly. But then as I was really starting to heal from that experience, and we know with grief, we never completely finish that grieving process. But my sister unexpectedly became ill, my eldest sister, back in 2019, last year, yes. And she, although I wasn't caring for her in her home initially, she ended up hospitalized for about 2 months, and there was no one else who was able to be there with her and advocate for her. And she reached a point where she really needed someone to be a voice for her because she was no longer able to make decisions for herself and whatnot. So yeah, each of those experiences have been quite different for me, yet of course the similarities are there as well as I would imagine any caregiver would find.
So you mentioned that you were also working in the hospice world or the community in Florida, I think it was. Over this time period, you had 13 years of therapy, hospice, and mixed in with the music therapy. How did that help you in your caregiving role?
Well, I think it did in the sense that in my hospice work, I was working with patients and their families and their caregivers. So many times I would go to a patient's home and the caregiver would be present for the music therapy session and of course would be welcomed to participate as long as that was something that the patient was approving of, And in cases of patients that I had who were suffering from dementia, it was really helpful to have the caregiver remain there for so many reasons. First of all, the ability that the caregiver had to help connect me with the patient's musical preferences, on a basic level, but also what their story had been over their lifetime, so that I could relate to them not just as they were in that moment, but to know more about who they had been, because obviously they're still there. They're still there, maybe not able to express themselves as they once did, but I always believed that, and still do, that the essence of who they are is still there, still remains. So caregivers were very helpful from that perspective, but I felt that the therapy was as beneficial to the caregiver as it was to the patient, him or herself, because often what would happen would be, the caregiver might be able to observe something really positive that the patient's doing that they might not have even realized the patient could still do. For example, I'm thinking of one patient I had who was actually living in a nursing facility, though his wife was present with him there pretty much every day, 7 or 8 hours a day with him. And she had requested music therapy for him, and he offered to meet me there the first time I saw him, and which I always greatly appreciated, and family wanted to be involved, as I said before. So when I arrived, this gentleman was just sitting in his wheelchair and was completely disconnected from everyone everyone and everything going on in the room. He didn't look up when I greeted him, or even when his wife came in, he really didn't look up and acknowledge her at all. And so she proceeded to tell me that he used to be very much involved in musical theater during his lifetime.
Nice.
And he had had some very major lead roles in theater. And she said that really music from the great musicals, Broadway musicals, were his favorite. That's what he would connect with the most. And she said his all-time favorite song was Old Man River. And she said, well, I don't suppose you know that or have access to that. I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do know that. And one of the little things I can tell you that music therapists have is quite a repertoire of music that they can draw upon in a moment, So, and I used to, carry all of that. And it helped when later on I was able to shift to putting it all on an iPad and just carrying that into a session as opposed to all my music books. But anyway, I digress a little bit there. So I set up my piano keyboard, which is what I typically utilized in my therapy sessions, and pulled out the music to Old Man River, and she pushed his wheelchair up so that it would be close, sort of next to the keyboard, next to where I was sitting. And I began to play the introduction, just the introduction. I hadn't even got to the lyrics yet. And as I began to play the introduction to that song, this gentleman starts to just, his body, his posture, he starts to, as if he's just, coming alive, starting to just blossom.
That's
and pretty
amazing.
soon as the introduction went on, he's sitting up straight and tall. His eyes are wide open. He's, just taking it in. And honestly, I thought he's about to take a breath. He reminded me of a singer up on the stage, just getting ready to take a breath and belt it out. And sure enough, as soon as I began to sing the lyrics, he started with me. And he went through and he sang the entire song. And there were a couple spots where he didn't have the words, but he had the rhythm. So he would substitute a word or two that would fit the rhythm. But the essence of the song was all there. And I noticed that the tears were just falling from his right
That's
side.
amazing.
When he finished, she said, I have not heard him speak, let alone sing, for 2 years. And she said this was just such a profound experience to be able to hear him and to see him connect, to see his eyes light up with the music. It was just very powerful.
Absolutely.
For her, and obviously for him too, because it just reconnected him with something that had been so meaningful to him, and it certainly served as a reminder to her that he was indeed still there.
Yes.
And in the sessions that took place after that, gradually as he became sicker and weaker, the singing wasn't as present as it had been that first time. But, over the months, I would say that declined or decreased a bit. However, that light in his eyes when he heard the music was still there, even when he was too weak to sing.
Right.
So, that is such a small example anyway.
It's very
one
powerful.
example of many examples I could give you about how it can benefit the patient, but also the caregiver.
It's a very powerful example because I think not only for the care recipient that's there experiencing this, I think it is just as powerful for that caregiver to see their loved one and get that validation. Yes, they are still there, because that's a painful part to grieve and think about it in that way. Are they still in there? Are they gone? It's powerful to have that and see that and experience it. And so in that vein, not very many people understand what music therapy is. And you gave a perfect example of it, but can you tell me and explain a little bit more about what music therapy is actually about?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. Well, really at its essence, music therapy is considered the clinical or the therapeutic use of music to really improve a client's quality of life and health. So what we do is we use, the many facets of music that there are to help clients in different domains like their physical, emotional, social, even spiritual domains. And how we do that is through active and what we consider active and receptive music experiences. So those might be including things like obviously singing, but also music listening and instrument play, songwriting at times. That's something that can be very, very powerful, especially I think for caregivers too. So improvisation is another one, and that's something if we talk a little bit more later about self-care, that's something that I use quite a bit of for myself. But all of these experiences that I'm talking about are individualized to meet the client's specific needs and goals. So what we do is we really do a formal assessment at the start, and we determine, in all of these different domains, what are the client's greatest needs? What do they want to achieve through music therapy? And then we create basically a therapy plan that will help us get to a point of accomplishing those goals for that individual. There's really a common sort of misconception that music therapy it's just anything that makes us feel better. So I've seen even some folks I'm noticing on Instagram who identify themselves as providing music therapy, but they may be providing some therapeutic type music experience, but it's not necessarily music therapy, because to be truly music therapy, there has to be the relational aspect. It has to occur within the context of a therapeutic relationship, and the therapist has to be, a credentialed professional that's had a minimum of a bachelor's degree in music therapy. So all the education that's involved with music therapy, which incorporates quite a variety of different areas. And then also we complete a 6-month full-time internship following the degree before we can sit for our board certification. So it's a process to become a music therapist. And like any other therapist, speech, OT, PT, we have to maintain our CUs every 5 years in order to become recertified. We have to have 100 hours of continuing education in order to, be considered still that we are board certified music therapists. So that's sort of the general definition, and also some background about how we get there as music therapists.
So as you've gone through the training and you've learned what to do, and now you are meeting with clients, and even not necessarily clients that are all hospice related or dementia related, because you've had other clients as well and this affects and helps support people of all ages.
Yes. In fact, my internship and my first jobs were with children with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. And some of my kids were as young as, toddlers, because they were receiving early intervention, and all the way up to around age 21. That was in a school setting, and then later in a day program setting where these were similar clients, but they were adults with developmental disabilities. So the types of goals that I would have for the children in the school setting were very different, obviously, than what I might have with someone with dementia or someone in hospice care. The children, we were often working on things like communication and social skills, following directions and taking turns, and all of those sorts of things can also be addressed beautifully through music therapy. And then the other experience that I had with children that I would want to mention too is children who have been traumatized. I worked in a facility that provided residential and day programming for seriously emotionally disturbed children. Again, these were kids who'd been traumatized, they'd witnessed violence, they'd been abused and neglected, just awful stories there of what these children had been through. And of course, worked closely with psychologists and social workers and all. However, what the professionals loved about the music therapy in particular was that it would be in our sessions where the children would first begin to disclose what their experience had been. They might not be able to give words to it, but they could find a way to express it in music, through music. We did a lot of drumming. I remember having a full drum set in my music therapy space, and oh my goodness, did the children like to use the drums to express themselves. There was a great deal of anger and hurt, of course, that they were experiencing. So again, very different goals for those children than the children I spoke of before, and
Right.
again, different than what I experienced later in my career, but all still utilizing that same sort of aspects of music that make it so fabulous as a form of therapy. The rhythms is really something that motivates us physically, for movement, and the emotional aspect of music that is heart-based, and the spiritual aspect of music that is more impacting your soul. So it's really been a very rich and a career where I just feel so blessed to have had all of these different kinds of experiences, and now have reached this point where I can still be reaching out to those who maybe can't access music therapy in their own community. So we're going to do that through telehealth, which has become, of course, all the rage.
Yeah, of course.
Not necessarily for a positive reason. It certainly has become something that's taken off in a way.
Well, I definitely am a firm believer of things happen for a reason. And so even though we're still all kind of adapting to this pandemic and the fallout of COVID, it has created some positives, because now doing the telehealth medicine, you can reach more people that wouldn't necessarily have known or have had access to you can now get the help that they need. And it's
right.
It's that blessing in disguise,
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting because it used to be that I anticipated that the most challenging part for me with my business would be helping people to understand how this could happen online.
Right.
That the telehealth part would be the challenge to explain to people. And that became, obviously no longer an issue whatsoever.
Right.
Everyone understands what it is now. And in fact, when I started my business, which wasn't just since the beginning of January of this year, there were maybe a handful of music therapists across the country that were providing online music therapy. And it was just crazy to see how in 2 months' time after that, everyone had to shift. Music therapists everywhere were now doing, music therapy via telehealth. So a lot to process all that's happened in the last 6 months or so for all of us in many, many different ways. But there's definitely been a change to how music therapy is delivered.
Definitely. You kind of have to. And once it's adapted and changed, we get that benefit yet again, because I know for me, I've had to actually, as a child, I used to play piano, and that was the calming, effective way. But now as an adult, I have to find different ways that I unfortunately let it go. I found, life evolved in other directions, and I don't have those outlets. So now, especially in this world that maybe someone would go out and have concerts to go listen to, and at this point we can't do that. So this adaptation is, it was definitely needed, and I'm glad it worked out for you that way to take this online, because when we're talking about music therapy, I think, when you have the physical therapy and you have the PT that people attend, and then you have the pharmaceuticals and you have medication therapy, I don't think people understand the benefits or even ever considered music as a therapy and what it actually does for us. And as I was mentioning earlier, when I was beginning to be a young mother, I knew the benefits of classical music for our young children as infants and toddlers. But that idea, I didn't really translate it until much later, that there is still that same benefit for us as adults, and even later, older adults. The neurological connections that music brings. And it's like music
Yes.
becomes another language. Yes, there's
Mm,
instruments, but it's
hmm
like music is that new language.
What a beautiful way to describe it, Jessica.
Well,
I really love that.
it makes me think about it in that way, just because the way you said that the wonderful example you shared of the gentleman that hadn't talked in 2 years. I mean, he now has a way to communicate with you, and the expressions, you see that difference in their face. And the children and even young adults who are struggling with their own emotional needs, because that's what I did as a child myself. The piano, coming home from school and being frustrated, feeling bullied or upset or angry. And I took it out on the
Mm-hmm.
piano. Definitely took it out on the piano.
Right.
And that's where sometimes now as an adult, I wish I had the time to go back to that and find that. But instead, I have to find other types of music. It's not necessarily have to, I want to. And I do seek out different types of music that doesn't necessarily have lyrics or words in it, so that I don't get distracted further, but that I can listen to a certain type of music that is calming and relaxing. So is that kind of what the process happens with music therapy for your clientele? Is that what you're trying to help them experience?
Yes, that is very, very true. And the other thing I would love for people to be aware of is that there are actually, physiological changes that music produces for us.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually does, there's research that has proven out that, music increases our so-called feel-good hormones, our
Yes.
dopamine levels, our endorphins. And so if that's happening in our brains as a result of music, what is happening is that the stress levels are then being reduced. So, it's a perfect it's a perfect way to be able to combat stress, really, to activate those hormones that are going to decrease your stress and increase your, happiness and joy, and lessen your feelings of burnout or depression or anger, and really transform those into something more positive.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Absolutely. Because I know that I've had days where I'm just so focused on caring and things are not going the way I would like them to go, or just other areas of life that are kind of piling on to that caregiving role. And I get that monkey in the mind kind of thing. I can find my peace and quiet in the morning, but then sometimes as the day gets going, my mind is not so quiet. And so I can sometimes, especially now, I can start to feel that anxiety just kind of creep in. And my go-to lately
Mm-hmm.
has been, finding my earplugs so I can plug into some sort of calming music that helps calm that monkey in the mind. And it makes me feel better. It makes me feel more at rest and peace, and not as focused on the things that I'm stressing on. People can tell me time and time and time again, you're worrying about things that you shouldn't worry about, or you don't worry about
Yes.
this or that. It's not going to happen. And it doesn't, I can hear that and they can say it all they want, but that doesn't stop me from worrying until I have something that distracts me. And music does that more often than not.
Yes. Oh, the distraction element to it is really important, and we're learning more and more about that. But music, what it really does is it literally turns off the aspects of overthinking and things like self-monitoring, things that get in the way of us, moving forward. And it's not just what music does for us, but also what it undoes when you think about it that way. And you just described it beautifully, how you can transition from one state to another because the music distracts you. And you described exactly what I just said. It's turning off those aspects of overthinking in your brain and helping you, get back to the moment and being in a calmer place
Right.
as a result.
Right. And I'm glad you did mention how it affects the psychological and the physiological, because that is that part of music that I kind of, got addicted. If you let go of one bad thing to find something else to get addicted to, once I got my eating habits in check, because that was my go-to for comfort. It became music
Mm-hmm.
eventually. And I got to the point where sometimes at night I didn't want to sleep without, or I couldn't fall asleep. Not that I didn't want to sleep, but I couldn't fall asleep without having some sort of music to fall asleep to. And I can't listen to things with lyrics when I'm going to sleep, but I was looking for I came across binaural meditations, and that I guess I
Mm-hmm.
hit the frequency just right, the healing kind of frequencies, what are considered. And so that it was not only calming and relaxing and quieting the mind, but so peaceful that I actually fell asleep to the music. And that's something that I noticed, that after I did that day in after day and night after night, by the next day, I was definitely rested and felt like I had deeper
Mm-hmm.
sleep. My body didn't ache as much. And I guess instead of having that monkey of the mind still going even at night where you're tossing and turning and not getting that restful, restorative sleep, that music made that much of a difference. It's like it changed the frequency in my body at the same time. And I knew it worked. I just didn't know why or how. And so
Right.
I got stuck on that.
Well, I am similar to what you just described is how I'm finding, especially since the pandemic started, I'm finding that I need to have music before I go to sleep as well, in order to go to sleep.
Right.
As a matter of fact, like you said, and for me it's similar. I can't have any lyrics, and I would suggest to anyone who's looking for something helpful and conducive to sleep. I have a Pandora channel that is my go-to, Liquid Mind, and it's music that is really, it's not rhythmic. It doesn't have any kind of steady beat to it. It's more ambiguous,
Right.
and it doesn't have a melody that you can follow necessarily, and that allows you to just sort of get lost in it, so to speak. Also helps to lower your heart rate and to lower your blood pressure, and all of the things that you mentioned as well. I realize that for some people, and my husband is one who would say, no, I can't do that. That would not be the kind of music that would help him go to sleep, although I still just am convinced if he would give it a real try, it might help. But he's one that just, it has to have movement to it. The music has to have movement,
Right.
and that's what the music that gives him joy and hence helps him relax. So it's different for everyone, but in general, music that has a slow tempo that will sort of match your resting heart rate of between 60 and 80 beats per minute, that's minimal to no words, has more mellow tones, low complexity of rhythm and melody. That's going to be the music that's ideal for inducing sleep and also for meditation.
Definitely. I like to meditate whenever I can. Of course, right now we're in Texas and the heat is unbearable. But the times that I'm actually able to meditate outside, I've had moments where I've taken the music and have my earbuds and find that quiet spot outside where I can meditate. And it is a therapeutic, cathartic release with the music that goes along with the emotions. And now I completely have bought into and understand, especially for people who are living with dementia and where we can't see, like we see someone who's trapped inside and they see us on the outside and I am able to communicate with us. But music becomes that release of stress, that reduction of anxiety, that even reduction of depression and agitation, because I would sit outside and do my meditations to the point with that music where I would be in tears.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful. And it's just, that state of peace. And so returning back to the caregiving, it's like switch the hat and put it back on. Okay, now I have to I'm done with my moment of meditation. I gave myself 30 minutes or I gave myself 15 minutes, however I was able to be given myself. Now I have to switch that hat back on and go back inside and step back into that caregiving role. But I step back into it much more at peace and able to actually go with the rest of the day and let things that I was worrying about no longer affecting me in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's fantastic. It's wonderful that you have found something that works so effectively for you. And I think sometimes as caregivers, folks are just in such a place of overwhelm that they just don't feel that anything could work for them.
Right.
And they may not even be as willing to try. Sometimes it's the most simple things that they wouldn't even have imagined, could give them such a lift. Movement, dance. I mean, that goes hand in hand with music, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking again with the physiological piece. And, like for me, if I'm going to be cleaning the house, I need to have really upbeat music,
right. Me
and people
too.
with, because music motivates us too.
Mm-hmm.
The rhythm itself motivates. And I just love when people can connect with movement and dance too. And even people with dementia who maybe used to dance, I would love to see it when my patients and their caregiver would move together. They may be not able to dance the way they did at one time, but just that movement together, that synchronous movement with music, it's just so connecting for them. And again, physiologically, so uplifting.
Absolutely. You don't think about music in that way, and that's why I started hearing and seeing it more often, the phrase healing frequencies. You don't think about it that way. And there are some documentaries I remember seeing years ago with sounds, different like soft, gentle sounds and harsh sounds that were placed near water and frozen water, or to freeze the water with the music going. And you could see a beautiful snowflake or a weird looking, I guess it still made a snowflake, but a weird pattern between the beautiful tone and the not so beautiful tone. But these healing frequencies, mm-hmm. It's doing the same thing to our bodies, our muscles, the tension and the pain that builds up. It's that frequency that helps break some of that up.
Yes. Sound bathing, I know it's referred to by some. It is extremely powerful. That's not something that I have necessarily practiced myself, but I'm very much aware of others who have, and people who utilize singing bowls. That's another beautiful instrument, that can really connect you with those positive frequencies and healing frequencies.
The singing bowls. I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually had the opportunity to experience that recently, a couple weeks ago, and I was a little skeptical. I enjoyed the sound. I didn't realize I would actually feel the sound until I was feeling the sound reverberating through my body. I could feel it in my chest. I could feel it in my head. It was like if I had a headache or any kind of tension, I can see how that would reverberate, and that vibration would help break that up. It's amazing because you don't think about it that way. It's just music. It's something that we just listen to, right? It's not. No, it actually changes us.
Right. It seems innocuous, to some people, and yet it may not even realize all that's going on with it as it's happening. When I think about individuals with memory issues and dementia, one of the things I wanted to be sure to mention, I know you brought up at the outset here today about how music connects us with emotion. Mm-hmm. And there's been a great deal of research that's come into play in the last 10 years, which has shown us that not only is that there are places in our brain where music is stored, but it's not just our music memories that are stored there. It's the emotions that are connected with those musical memories that are stored in that same place.
Interesting.
And it's very interesting. And that explains why when you hear that song, you're reduced to tears all of a sudden. You're driving along, and this happens to me a lot. I hear, and because there are so many songs that trigger my emotions since I've worked with so many different people through the years, and I connect with their stories, and I remember that music was meaningful to them, and then I still remember, in addition to my own of course my own songs that I connect with. But what I wanted to say about that was that for people with dementia and different areas of the brain are experiencing atrophy, that area of the brain, the prefrontal medial cortex, where the music memories and emotions are stored, is one of the last areas of the brain to atrophy with dementia. And so that really explains how that gentleman, who was able to sing Old Man River, and connect with the feeling. And I could tell you countless stories of situations where, in fact, one of the stories, I have a blog called Songful Stories. I decided it was really time to try to put in writing these experiences that have been so profound for me, to get them down in writing, and hopefully by sharing them help others understand better how music is therapy. I have a story there that relates specifically to this, so I won't go into detail. But again, just the fact that it's internal, it's physiological, it is in our brain. We are wired for music, and we are wired to retain music, really till the very ends of our lives. So
absolutely,
even when we have dementia.
Yeah, even still. And that is another thing that people forget, is that, we talked about the physical therapist. Obviously, if you have an injury that you've experienced, or your loved one had surgery, and then they do the physical therapy to get the muscle back in motion. But when you think about the brain is a muscle in a sense, and it needs its exercise as well. And music does that for us. And so one of the things that I found amazing was there's a Japanese study that was done back in 2018, and they examined the stress reducing effects of these frequencies and how it affected the endocrine system. And they found that some of these healing frequencies, this one specifically was actually 528 hertz, but this frequency was something that was very strong in stress reducing and helping the cells of the body to respond to the frequency and the vibration to heal, even just being exposed to it for 5 minutes. And so this vibration, or these frequencies, the sound through music, it helps in so many ways, clearing energetic blockages, and actually help the body to facilitate the healing process, the physical process, and the mental process. So it's just amazing.
Oh, yes. And that brings to mind, when you talked about energy, I worked closely with a Reiki practitioner in hospice, and she and I would often do sessions together with patients. And I would provide the music, but I would not necessarily be providing music that the individual knew. I would improvise, I would create music in the moment that would be much more like the music that you would listen to help you sleep, or for me to do so. And she would provide the Reiki, and so we would really be giving this person just all of this energy. It was just a profound thing to witness, how people would be transformed in a half an hour, or even less sometimes, of having those two modalities together. And having their energy be impacted in such a meaningful way was just really incredible to be part of.
It is, and it takes it to that spiritual level. When I was attending church, and I would hear, I know the format and how they would begin with music and end with music, and to me it was, at first it was the music that they played. It's what you heard when you were at church, and I kept hearing it referred to as the worship time, and I didn't really connect the dots until later. I thought, this, because there were times where I would be in church and singing, and the way the auditorium is set up in there, the sound that carries it, I would actually feel this kind of tingling in the back of my head, in this sensation. I thought, oh my gosh, this music is moving me so much. And then I realized, okay, I just said or thought this music is moving me. It literally is moving me in such a way that I'm physically feeling this change. And I felt so uplifted. And I was like, wow, it's music is even down to that spiritual level.
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up too, because I wanted to mention that for me, when you were speaking of how you use music for self-care, and I was just trying to determine whether or not I'm doing that on a consistent basis, because when you're a musician or you're using music to help others, sometimes you don't use it for for self-care.
Right.
But for me, I really do, and what I find benefits me is getting to the piano and just improvising, closing my eyes and just letting my fingers flow across the keys, no intent in mind for any particular song or anything, any style of music. It's just freeing. And what it does is just transforms, for me, it transforms my state of stress or anxiety into a state of calm. And it's spiritual for me. It becomes a time when I find myself best able to commune with God. And it's really just literally soothing my soul, and I'm feeling it in such a profound way, just as similar to what you were describing about that experience of being in church and singing and what that can do for you. So I'm really glad you brought up the spiritual side, because I didn't want for us to finish up without mentioning that aspect of it too.
Absolutely. Yes, the spiritual aspect of this. I mean, yes, I have music that I listen to when I write. I have certain kind of music that I listen to for focusing, studying, working, just different sounds that I care to listen to that help me stay focused. I have music that I listen to while I'm driving, but then I have my very, very specific type of music where I'm in that grief moment or I'm in that funk that I know I need something different. And so I do go to totally different kind of music, and I have that connection with the universe all around me. It's like you can close your eyes and just let go into that moment, and I can have that moment of be still, and I know that whatever I'm feeling, it's because it's flowing through me, it's around me. It's just beautiful. Can't put it any
and you're
other
alive,
way. Yes, exactly.
You really feel how alive you are, and in the midst of struggle and challenges and sadness and all that goes hand in hand with the caregiver journey and just the life journey.
Right.
To be able to connect with that and feel that sense of life flow within you, it's an amazing thing.
Yes, and it is. And then when you think about it, we start life and well, maybe not so much me personally, but we start with our kiddos. And like I exposed my kids to classical music, and I made sure they had it while they were going about their day, especially when they were about to nap. I would certainly turn the classical music on, and it benefited them in their developmental process and going to sleep at night even. So I learned that, and then I kind of forgot it throughout life, but now coming back on this other end of life, and for my mother, and knowing that she enjoys Motown music, and that's what gets her moving and shaking and going, and seeing the light come back in her eyes, and I can't help but think in those moments, thank you, God. Thank you for that moment, because it's you see it. And if anyone ever asks or wonders, where is he in all this mess? Put that music on and see them smile, and you'll see them in their eyes right there.
Absolutely. And that's something that no one can take from them or from you.
Exactly.
That experience.
A beautiful memory to have. So as the rest of this year kind of unfolds and goes on, and you continue with your telemusic, how do people find you if they want to reach out to actually attempt to go through some musical therapy or have their loved ones engage? How would they find you?
Absolutely. You can find me on my website, which is www.musictherapyathome.com. And there is a contact form on my website. If folks will just send me their email address and, fill out the contact form, very basic, just a first name and an email address. And if they would like me to contact them by phone, I'm more than happy to. They can leave their phone number and then I will be in touch. And the first step is just to have a phone conversation where we can talk about what they would like to receive through the music therapy. What are they looking for? Then I can give them more information about, here's what music therapy has to offer. This is how it works via telehealth, and then they can determine if it's something that they would like to pursue. I also have a Facebook business page, and they can contact me there, or even through a direct message in Instagram. Again, music therapy at home. I would really love to connect with anyone who's thinking about, is this something that might benefit me or my loved one? Let's chat about it and see if it would indeed be something that would be of benefit and would make sense for them. So I encourage your listeners to reach out if that's something that they think might just be something that would work for them.
And I agree, it will. It definitely will. It's for the caregiver and their loved ones. It's not one way or the other. So maybe a different style of music or a different care plan or a different therapy plan, but it's beneficial for both.
Yes, there's something for everyone. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Karla. I really appreciate you taking the time and helping us get a better mindset around what music therapy is and how it can benefit us overall.
Well, it's been a privilege for me to have this time with you, Jessica. Thank you again for your interest and your openness to share more with the world about music therapy. It means a great deal to me and all of us music therapists out there. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this gave you more food for thought. And until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalazelcanon.com. This podcast is produced by Canon Light Media, LLC, www.canonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.